And this is also in the context now of what appears to be like a crisis in trans violence,
Hmm.
where February is not over yet, and we've had now three trans shootings in North America. What happened in British Columbia earlier this month, and then in Rhode Island, and then now this.
Over the weekend, another trans shooter allegedly fired upon a Border Patrol agent at the Canadian border. This attack is shockingly similar to another trans shooting last year in Vermont. We have a great sponsor for today's show. It is Rumble Wallet. Oh my gosh, we love Rumble Wallet. You may have seen the conversations happening online lately. Censorship is back and it is happening everywhere. Platforms are controlling narratives and pushing the stuff that they want us to see. We need to fight back. Rumble is the only company that has stood the test of time and deserves our support. On one side, Rumble is challenging big tech censorship, but now, on the other side, they have introduced something that will give us protection from the big banks that are shutting us off. Banks can cancel our accounts and freeze our cards. So that is exactly why Rumble has launched Rumble Wallet. It's a wallet that no one can cancel and a wallet that supporters can use to instantly tip creators like ourselves here at Timcast without any middlemen taking cuts. With Rumble Wallet, you control your money, not a bank, not a government, not a tech company, not even Rumble can touch it. It's yours. It is only yours. It's for you and to protect you and your family, your future. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. You can buy and save digital assets like Bitcoin or Tether Gold in one place. Tether Gold is real gold on the blockchain with ownership of physical gold bars. It is not only a wallet to buy and save, but it also allows you to support your favorite creators by tipping them with the click of a button. There will be no fees when you tip this channel or others, and we'll actually receive the tip instantly, unlike other platforms where we have to wait for payouts. That's a game changer, quite frankly. That is a game changer. Let's be honest here. Support this show and other creators by clicking the tip button on this Rumble channel. It is wallet.rumble.com. Again, download Rumble Wallet today, open an account, and step away from the big banks for good. Wallet.rumble.com or search Rumble Wallet on the app stores. Hello, Andy. Hello. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I think 99% of everyone in the audience is very familiar with who you are. But for those like 3 people who aren't, could you give them a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
I am a journalist who reports on Antifa, trans violence, and the extreme far left.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on. Obviously, your Substack, no comment, fantastic. Everyone needs to be subscribed. Quite frankly, it's one of the best reads on the internet. But you put out this piece regarding this situation in New Hampshire. Obviously, the shooting of a Border Patrol agent, and again, the alleged suspect in the shooting again was trans. This is all again alleged, but it was trans. And in the article, you kind of explain this Zizian death cult, and you kind of tie it back to the shooting last year in Vermont. And you're saying, look, there's a lot of similarities here. There's a lot of indications that this Zizian death cult could be involved. Could you break down kind of what you know so far and sort of this trans element in these shootings?
So what happened is on the 21st of February in very rural, remote area of New Hampshire in a town called Pittsburgh, there was an incident involving a not alleged trans person, natural trans person. There's documentation of gender identity changes. A suspect named Blue Daly, that was the chosen name. And this person is accused by the federal government of trying to kill a border patrol officer, firing upon him, and in the shootout, getting seriously injured. That suspect is still in hospital receiving treatment. However, he has been federally charged with attempted murder of a federal agent. Now, this has some eerie similars to an incident that happened on Inauguration Day a year ago, about an hour away in neighboring Vermont, also right by the Canadian border, where two transgender members of a trans death cult were involved in a shootout. One of them, a German national, died at the scene. A Border Patrol officer was murdered. His name is David Marland. And a American woman from Seattle named Teresa Youngblood, who used the name Milo, was injured but survived. And she's been charged with murder, assault with a deadly weapon. And federal prosecutors in New Hampshire are looking at if there are any possible links between Mr. Blue Daly, birth name Colin Zeke, by the way, with what happened in Vermont, given how there's just so many similarities. And this is also in the context now of what appears to be like a crisis in trans violence,
Hmm.
where February is not over yet, and we've had now 3 trans shootings in North America. What happened in British Columbia earlier this month, and then in Rhode Island, and then now this.
I mean, it's unbelievable seeing this escalation. We had Libby Emmons, obviously the post millennial. She was on yesterday, and we were kind of discussing what's going on in the trans community, where you're seeing an escalation in violence. It's really a disturbing situation. But obviously, you'd brought up there's sort of some organized elements going on with some of these incidents, these trans violence incidents. I mean, obviously, the one in Rhode Island seems to just kind of be out of nowhere, that sort of thing. But specifically with the Zizian death cult, that's a lot of interest to people because they hear the name, but they don't really know too much about it. Could you maybe expand on what's going on, if there's like a degree of organization with some of these shootings? Obviously some online, they're interacting with people online, these sorts of things.
The so-called Zizian death cult is named that because the leader of the cult is a trans person who uses the alias Ziz. Now, there's 7 members in custody across multiple states across the US, and they are linked to at least 8 violent deaths. Really brutal stuff. So there was a Border Patrol agent who was shot to death. And then just a few days before that, there was an elderly witness and victim who was set to testify at a attempted murder trial in California, and he was assassinated by knife by the husband of the person who's been charged federally in the Vermont shooting. So there are all these links in killings and suicides happening across the US. Basically, their ideology is they're a group of rationalists, most of them who came to the Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, and then they became radicalized around their transgender identity. If you read, they were perpetually online, so they left all these blog writings online. You can see that they felt that the whole world was against them, and this is a very common theme we're seeing with many of these trans extremists. They leave posts online that accusing this and that of transphobia, of basically the whole world being against them,
Right.
and it gives a justification in their minds quite often for violence, which is why we can see in even the mainstream messaging among transgender activists, they're very quick to allude to violence and threats of violent retribution against people who they accuse of transphobia or being against trans rights. And they view themselves in their own language as victims of trans genocide. Therefore, anything they do is self-defense, including injuring people, killing people, maiming them, or death threats.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's so disturbing when we see. I mean, the one that jumps out to me was the Covenant Presbyterian shooting in Nashville. I think it would have been 2 years ago now. Immediately following the shooting, we had a lot of these trans activists come out, and of course they put out a brief condemnation because it's for PR. But then they follow it up with like asterisk after asterisk after asterisk of, they're almost more concerned with the backlash against the trans community, whatever that is, versus the actual situation that we're seeing, which is, okay, we are seeing an increase in violence that needs to be addressed. And then the backlash, so to speak, again, are just people really asking questions like, hey, what's going on over there? Why does this keep happening? Can you guys maybe provide an explanation for us here? And instead, it just, from what it seems like is sort of these people end up going into tighter and tighter circles. They tighten ranks more and more. That to me just seems like it's going to get worse and worse. I don't know.
Yeah, and how that's particularly manifested, we can see this just in the last 5 years, is that trans people and radical queer activists are being encouraged to take up firearms training, stockpile weapons, coupled with an ideology of an anti-government ideology and I would call it misandrist ideology, in that they're having a simmering hatred, resentment against wider society. You brought up some of the reaction to the Nashville Covenant Christian School shooting, in which a transgender shooter, Audrey Hale, a female, one of the few female mass school shooters, was transgender. And the reaction to that was when there was a protest at the state capitol in Nashville a few days after the shooting. There was a memorial held by trans activists and queer activists, and they held up 7 fingers for the victims but there were 6 victims in the shootings, which I think
Mm.
was quite telling that they viewed
Mm.
Miss Hale as a victim, even though she was the perpetrator of killings of children and those who worked at the school. And they always speak about a fear of backlash, and the backlash doesn't come. It comes in the form of common sense legislation, such as Kansas State just now putting into law that they are invalidating um, official documents like birth certificates and driver's licenses that have been falsely altered with inaccurate
Mm.
information.
Mm-hmm.
Most states in the US, particularly ones run by Democrats, allow people to self identify their gender identity, which means then those documents are inaccurate. You know, somebody is born male or female, and if you go back and change it based on how you feel for any particular moment, that birth certificate is inaccurate. So Kansas now has a law in effect, thanks to the Republicans in
Mm.
power there, and this is now being brought out by trans activists as an example of trans genocide. And of course, the big elephant in the room, which I'm sure the listeners and viewers are thinking of, is what are the effects of cross-sex hormones on
Yeah.
people who already have very, very high rates of mental health and psychiatric disorders. There's been research that's been done on the past. We don't see it very much now, but the effects on the brain, on the male brain, for example, when estrogen is introduced for an extended amount of time, they have a reduction in uh, brain gray matter, which has all sorts of effects
Mm-hmm.
on mood and other things that need to be studied. In the past, when there was research, particularly on homicides where there was a sexualized violence angle to it,
Mm-hmm.
there were very high rates of people, the perpetrators, who had genital and gender dysphoria.
Mm.
So, in the literature, in academic literature, peer research studies that have been done in the past, there's a lot of evidence that this is a community that has a lot of issues, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the contemporary 21st century context, where they do have access very easily to drugs
Yeah.
and cross-sex hormones and guns and weapons, I think that may be partially what's explaining this crisis we see of trans violence.
Now, you obviously are, keep an eye on everything internationally. I think it's safe to say you're one of the best reporters around. Is this kind of a uniquely American, maybe even Canadian issue, or is this happening kind of broadly across Western civilization?
I'm speaking to you from England, and there's a far left trans militancy in Western Europe as well. It's broadly a Western phenomenon. It's a
Mm-hmm.
product of the excesses of liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
However, what's happening in the US, and you could say to Canada as well, is that the trans individuals in the US have easy access to firearms,
Mm-hmm.
which they can use to kill people,
Mm-hmm.
mass numbers of people in some instances, whereas that type of variable is not in play in other places.
Right. That makes sense. What I guess when you see an attack on a border patrol agent, that obviously indicates these people obviously are there's a leftism component. I mean, that's just obvious. It's Captain Obvious here. The leftism component. Is that what's going on in these cults? Are these cults the recruitment effort? Are they recruiting people that are just broadly left wing that are sort of queer, or is this specifically targeting people that have already transitioned? Like, how does that specifically work? What kind of people are getting roped into these operations?
So going back to the Zizian trans death cult,
Mm-hmm.
their worldview was particularly left wing.
Right.
It's clear in all the writings that were left by the alleged members of this network and cult. They incorporated aspects of anarchist politics as well as just mainstream leftism as well, particularly this grievance against what they say is Republicans pursuing agenda of fascism and trans genocide against people like us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so disturbing that this is happening, because to a degree it feels like there's not really that much the government can do about it. Because I mean, if these are just happening again online, in these online communities, you kind of feel a degree of helplessness. It feels like the issue is further up the chain. Again, we need to address the implications of these hormones that are being implemented. Perhaps having conversations around access to gender reassignment surgery broadly. I don't know if you think those are fair categorizations, but when I look at like the trans death culture, I just don't see what the government can really do about that in and of itself. It feels like the issue is a lot further up the chain.
You're right that policy discussions are up the chain. However, the first thing that needs to be done is just having honest conversations about it. And we really aren't. I mean, other than people reacting on social media, it hasn't been engaged with as a real crisis by intellectuals, by people who study all the components that are part of this. We're talking about health, mental health, policies around access to weapons, and a whole number of other things. So we can't even take the first step because the first step is shut down as transphobia. And there's so many parallels to what was happening 2 decades ago with those who wanted to have discussions about radical Islam. In some ways, I feel like we almost haven't made very little steps in that as well. And we had 20 years to work on that.
That's what's so interesting now is seeing these. I guess I was talking to Libby about this yesterday. These permission pieces that are coming out from like the Washington Post and the New York Times, where they're saying, okay, maybe we've gone too far with the trans thing. Maybe we have another conversation about where's the line. What age should we be? These sorts of things. They're having these permission pieces where now they're kind of signaling to the left, hey, we might have gone too far. Let's start retracting a little bit. Even Gavin Newsom, came out a few days ago and was saying, this isn't going to play in Peoria. We need to reshape our approach to the trans issue, so to speak. I think the most offensive thing to that would be to people that have already transitioned and they're saying, hey, wait a second, you just pulled the ladder up behind me. I thought this was like the new thing. And then now we're having a conversation about it because it's not politically viable. I think that's the primary reason. But do you see this as like a reckoning on the left, or do you think that they're just saying this is a very politically inexpedient policy to have?
It's not a reckoning. It's a little bit of progress on one particular part of the story, which is around the medicalization of minors, which is not the direct issue, I think, to the issue of trans violence, but it's connected to it.
Sure.
In that some of those who have been accused of or engaged in this mass violence have involved teenagers. Some of them transition quite young, for example, like the Canadian trans shooter. And there are a lot of questions about why now are some of the medical associations, some of the big ones, there's been 2 who have spoken out saying, hey, in terms of cosmetic procedures, that should be delayed until adulthood. I mean, I'll give them a clap for that. Late, but I'm glad they came to that. There was another one that followed up on that recommendation. And I support like coming on late is better than coming on never at all.
Sure.
And I think, puberty blockers, despite what trans activists say about how the science is not hold, science is real, on their claims, it's not subtle. Puberty blockers being used to treat children with gender confusion is new, and so the long-term effects aren't known. And during puberty, and just in terms of the physical development of the body, that's where your bones develop the density that's needed for later in life. There's a lot of brain development that happens through puberty. So, you're playing with like a lot of dangerous things when you're putting children and young adolescents on a delay of something that their body is supposed to go through in terms of developing into a healthy human. This is beyond the discussion about how they identify gender-wise. It's about physical health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I mean, like at least the football is moving down the field, so to speak. I think, again, to give them a little golf clap here and there. But Andy, I know we're running out of time here. I really appreciate you coming on. You're such a legend. So I'm so happy to have you on. Where can people find you to get more?
Thank you. My reporting's at ngocomment.com. No comment. I also have a New York Times bestseller that came out in 2021 called Unmasked, and that's all about Antifa.
Let's go. Thank you so much, Andy. I'll catch you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you.